This day has come. We were a crusader, a legionary and a samurai. Now let's go to the place everyone has dreamt about. Of course, I'm talking about Sparta, the roughest country in history. Today we'll get six-pack ABS, fight Persians with Leonidas, and learn the truth about 300 Spartans and their heroism. Unfortunately, the real life is much different from what we've seen in the movies and games, but that's exactly why you need our channel. So please vote in comments if you want to go into Sparta. And be ready. Things will get brutal. Few historical facts. The very name of the country is not very accurate, and we use it thanks to Romans. Look at Spartan shields. There you can see the letter L. In Greek it sounds like lambda. The reason is very simple. The Spartans didn't call themselves Spartans. They were Lacedaemons, in honor of the city with the same name. Even experienced historians sometimes mistakenly stress the last syllable. Only later they started to call this city Sparta, thanks to which we have the modern name. The second prejudice is viewing Sparta as a closed city. No, Sparta was a country that existed almost for 1,000 of years, from the 11th to the 1st century BC. There were many countries on the territory of modern Greece. Sparta was located on the south of peninsula, in the region called Laconia. By the way, the word laconic originates exactly from here, because people who live here were not very talkative. That's where our Spartan Vasilis was born. It's a Greek name and a very honorable one. It means king. It's 480 BC. Sparta is powerful as never before. It dominates the whole Peloponnese. Close by you could see the city of Athens, which Spartans didn't like. But the biggest problem is not Athens. It is the Eastern Empire of Achaemenids, better known as Persians. They don't distinguish Greeks from one another and have one goal: to conquer all Greek lands. Obviously, it's a serious problem because Persians had much more resources, people, and they were united. Greece was divided into small countries that united only to combat their common enemy. The Persians were together from the very beginning. We will jump right ahead and say they lost. Why? Because the art of war was sacred to Greeks and even vital to Spartans. Our Vasilis is a typical homoios. That's how Spartans called citizens. There were also usual workers Maphaks and Neodamots, who were also considered half-citizens. But the Helots lived the hardest life. It was the poorest caste among Spartans that consisted mainly of peasants. They were in between peasants in servitude and slaves. But Sparta had a more complex structure than other countries. For example, the family of Vasilis could have tens of helots with lands. On paper, they were peasants, and they had to pay Vasilis a percentage of income. Sparta differed from other countries in lords not being able to raise this percentage. It was fixed on a state level. Vasilis was lucky to be Spartan. One citizen had 10 helots who often rebelled. They were punished severely. One time a year, Sparta's leaders declared war on Helots to slaughter the most rebellious and keep everyone at bay. Yes, you've heard it right. Spartans declared war on themselves. Because it's one of the most brutal countries in history. Everything was dedicated to one goal: war. Vasilis and other boys, at the age of 7, went to the army. There, boys were divided into groups and taught fighting, sports, and even reading. It was pretty unusual for those times. Boys were always accompanied by an adult, and they always walked barefoot and in the same clothes in summer and winter. The diet is a whole another story. All teenagers ate special broth. It was called melanas. It's pork boiled in blood and vinegar. It was almost impossible to eat, and children were always starved. The state encouraged it. Simplicity was a cult thing for Sparta, and strength. No one forbade teenagers to steal. The punishment was cruel, but if not proven, the thief was praised for his skills. We've learned so from Plutarch, who in the 1st century AD wrote that the council ordered to toss weak children off the cliff to Apophets. Like no one asked parents, and it was mandatory. The problem is that Greek historians often embellish their stories. It was much simpler. They killed children not just in Sparta, but in many other areas of Greece and Rome. However, they killed only very ill children to stop their suffering. For inferior citizens, they had a special caste. They were called Hippomeians. Yes, they were not respected, but not killed. The archaeologists have already explored many ravines into which children presumably were tossed and haven't found any remains. Now back to Vasilis. Children could wear clothes at age 12. Until that they stayed naked. They slept in barracks and straw, and in cold days they added nettle. It burned the body and kept it warm. It helped them to survive. At age 17 they had to pass the last trial. Climb up to Artemisium. It was up in the mountains. During the trial you had to survive a severe whipping. Boys had to survive extensive beating that was stopped only after the first blood. If Spartans screamed, the beating continued even after the blood. That's how the final exam looked like. Our Vasilis is a great fighter and he passed the trials. However, it only granted him the right to leave the barracks and go to the public. Being 17 years old, he only started his service. To understand how difficult it was, let's discuss salary. As we have already mentioned, good food was considered a luxury. That's why Spartan diet was really a thing back then. Vasilis received his field ration once a month, which was 3.5 kilograms of barley, 2.5 kilograms of cheese, 1 kilogram of dates, and around 5 liters of wine. Compare this with the diet of Roman legionaries or samurais from the previous episodes and you will be really upset. Also, Vasilis, just like Spartans, received few metal rods, which weighed 625 grams each. It's a whole another story to tell. To avoid luxury and inequality, Lycurgus of Sparta came up with an interesting solution. Collecting silver and gold was punished by death. These metal rods were served as money. So because one rod weighed 625 grams, they had to transport money by team of horses. The idea was that any large deal was visible. It was impossible to transfer such money hidden from the eyes. When the deal is public, you can actually see where someone has got so much money. A visitor from another country couldn't buy anything. Spartans were frightened by gold and silver money. This scheme killed corruption, assaults and robberies. Would you take a bribe that requires you to build a whole barn? So Vasilis received few metal rods with his food. He could buy about 10 kilograms of meat. However, he trained every day, because a Spartan was worthy of 10 usual soldiers, so he had to maintain his shape. Overall, 300 depicted the equipage pretty well. Our Vasilis, as any hoplite, had a round shield, a helmet, a cuirass and greaves. For some reason in the movie Spartans are bare-chested. Of course it's silly, it wasn't safe. But there was light infantry as well. They used spears, bows and darts. They used everything. They were taught to use all weapons from the earliest childhood. Some of the findings are still used in modern armies. They kept a straight line. They were disciplined and very well trained. It all made Spartan army invincible. A phalanx formation of 8 lines could stretch for a kilometer. Up until 371st year BC, it was impossible to beat them, and the reason was simple. Unlike other armies, Spartans didn't have engineering structures. They just went forward counting on the physical power and dominated their enemies. However, Vasilis lived in 480s BC and they were in the heat of fighting Persians. At the moment Leonidas is the king of Sparta and he is an excellent warrior just like anybody else. Everybody knows the movie 300, so we won't retell its plot, but we will point out the main differences between the movie and reality. Suppose our Vasilis was among these 300 Spartans. Together with Leonidas, who indeed fought on the front lines with his soldiers, Vasilis holds the line in Thermopylae. It's quite reasonable. We have showed you the map in the beginning of this episode. As indicated in many studies, there were around 2,050,000 Persians. Against them were only 7,000 of Greek warriors. It's worth mentioning that the number of Spartans was not accidental. Personal guards of the king consisted of 300 best warriors. They indeed contained the enemy who outnumbered them 20-fold. They would have stayed longer if not for the local men Ephialtes of Trachis, who wanted to earn some money. He told Persians that there was a path in the mountains that could be used to attack the Greeks from backside. However, Spartan reconnaissance learned of it first and reported this to Leonidas. He sent his army home, leaving only 300 of hoplites. It wasn't as romantic as it seems. He had a purpose. Retreat wasn't an option for Spartans. Leonidas was a king. There were nobody who could command him to retreat, and that's why he stayed. Our Vasilis also decided to stay. There's one thing not depicted in the movie. Other Greeks also decided to stay. Among others, 700 citizens of Thespius and 400 from Thebes. There were also Helots who we mentioned earlier. The number of slaves is not indicated, but they were often used as light infantry. So there were not only 300 Spartans fighting against Xerxes, but around 1,500 people. But this doesn't negate their heroism. They killed around 5,000 Persians, and not usual warriors, but immortals, the elite guards of the Persian army. Overall, in 2 days, 4,000 Greeks died. The Persians' losses were 5 times bigger. Thanks to psychological factor, Greeks will win the war and conclude an armistice. Don't cry over our Vasilis. As you've learned, his life wasn't easy. Dying in a battle was the highest honor for a Spartan. For example, one of the 300, Aristodemus, was ill during the battle. Leonidas sent him to a village for recovering. After the king and his guard was killed, Aristodemus went back to Sparta. There he was nicknamed Aristodemus the Coward, and even his subsequent feats didn't change his status. A year later, in 479 BC, other Spartan, Pausanias, led the Greek army for the final battle with Persians. It happened under Plataea, and the Persians were completely destroyed, despite they outnumbered the Greeks 3-1. Aristodemus, the warrior of the 300 Spartans, had become the hero of the battle, but even this didn't change his reputation. One last fun fact. If boys were raised as warriors from the very childhood, girls were raised as birth givers. Their lives were much easier. They were taught writing and sports. Their health was a priority. Sparta had really strong women. They knew how to use weapons. It was few thousand years ago. Only 100 years ago in certain countries, women couldn't vote. This explicitly shows that progress is subjective. No matter how strict was the life of Spartans, they earned their place in history. That's it for now. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a like and recommend your warriors for future episodes. See you soon.